He arrived early. He always did. The Riverbend Cafe sat low and patient at the bend of the river, lights like warm coins scattered behind the glass. Marcus had learned to be punctual because life had given him reasons to keep promises to himself. He came for the steam from the coffee, for the way the river softened the city lights, and for a little quiet that felt like an apology. The blind date was an odd favor to a college friend, but he had agreed. He did not expect the night to rearrange everything. The evening smelled of fresh grounds and wet pavement. The bell over the door jingled like a small confession. Marcus sat at his usual corner table, sleeves rolled, hands wrapped around a mug that tasted of bitter comfort. The chair opposite was empty, and the radio played a low piano with a rhythm that matched the pulse of the river. He was careful not to look at his watch, careful to keep the place between expectation and surprise. His life had been a ledger of neat endings and hesitations. He had once been a corporate lawyer who believed in clear lines. Then the firm collapsed, and he was left with a quiet apartment, a slow bank account, and a stubborn wish to be gentler to himself. He had moved here for the Riverview and the neighborhood that still remembered names. He had a scar on his left thumb from a broken promise made during a case he couldn't win. He kept a small photograph in his wallet of a rowboat at dawn, a token of summers when decision seemed possible. He had a sister named Sarah who ran the little bookstore 2 blocks over, a landlord Henry who whistled off-key, and a barista named Mia who always topped his latte with a leaf shaped in foam. He was cautious but not closed. That caution felt useful the moment the door opened and mud defined the silhouette that filled the frame. She came in like a story with torn pages. Her hair was plastered to her scalp, her jacket streaked with mud, and there was a small girl clinging to her sleeve with a stuffed rabbit whose ear was well loved. The first thing Marcus noticed was how her hands trembled when she pushed the door wider as if to lift the whole world inside. The second thing was a folded piece of paper tucked into her back pocket, edges darkened by rain, a childlike drawing peeking from within. The cafe held its breath for half a second. The air tasted of rain and cinnamon and the river. She scanned the room, found the corner where Marcus sat, and gave him a smile that was both embarrassed and fierce. "Sorry," she said, voice low. "I am so sorry. I am probably the messiest person you have ever met on a blind date." Marcus closed his book as if closing a small chapter. He stood and pulled out the chair. "Come sit," he said. "It is fine. Are you okay?" Her name was Emma. The little girl was named Lily. That simple exchange unrolled into the start of an evening neither of them expected. Dialogue came quick, honest, messy, and bright. "We were at the park," Emma explained, cheeks flushed from cold and exertion, "and Lily and her friend wanted to chase the ducks. Then she slipped near the bank, and I jumped in to grab her. The mud held my shoe like it wanted me to stay." Lily, hair smelling of wet grass, looked up at Marcus and offered him a carrot cake crumb as apology. The barista Mia appeared with 3 mugs and 2 aprons, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You two look like you have traveled through a weather report," she said, laughing. Conversation flowed with the warmth of the lamps. "You could have called," Marcus offered. "I did call," Emma said quickly, "but my phone died when I used it to call for help. The battery and I are not friends tonight." Lily chimed in with a squeal about ducks and mud and heroes. "You saved her?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "I tried," Emma said, voice low. "I did not want anyone to get hurt." The child pressed the drawing into Marcus's palm without ceremony. It was a leaf colored in with crayons, a bright green smudge at the center. "Lily made that," Emma said. "She says leaves are brave." That line landed like a small bell. The scene had 5 distinct textures. The cafe felt like wool and glass. Steam fogged the windows in soft rings. The river beyond carried a distant motor hum and the smell of cold water. The warmth of the cafe pressed against wet clothes like a forgiving hand. The crayon wax left a faint oily scent on Marcus's fingers. Words traded hands as if they were currency. The initial meeting became a conversation with 8 clear turns and more, each exchange revealing small truths. "Tell me about Lily," Marcus asked. "She is with her Aunt Rosa tonight," Emma said, "but she crawled away while Rosa was fixing dinner. I heard the splash and ran. I am not good with boats or mud, but I am good with jumping when my heart says to." "You seem like someone who jumps," Marcus said. "Sometimes," Emma replied. "Only when the thing falling could be someone I love." They talked until the rain lessened and the lamps at the river threw gold across the water. More voices stitched into the evening. Tom, the neighbor who walked dogs, came in and waved. Veronica, the librarian from across the street, peeked in to return a stack of poetry. Mark, an editor who sometimes wrote for the local paper, nodded and later asked for Emma's name. Each person added a line to the gentle chorus of the night. Marcus learned that Emma had moved into town 6 months ago, that she worked at the community center teaching art, that she had a laugh that started in her chest and traveled through the shoulders. She said she had been rebuilding after a divorce that arrived quietly and then like a storm. She had a stubborn optimism and a tendency to rescue what needed rescuing. Marcus learned how to listen to the pauses in her sentences, and she learned how to read the small, precise gestures that had once been all he used to show affection. When Emma's phone finally charged enough to ring, it vibrated against the wooden table like an urgent beetle. She answered quietly, and the voice on the other end brought a small catch to her throat. "Aunt Rosa says Lily is okay," she said, relief audible. "She fell, but she is fine." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, like a secret drawer sliding open. The night had started as an accidental meeting and was settling into something like possibility. Yet possibility has a way of being complicated. A text arrived shortly after from an old number on Emma's phone. The message was brief and sharp. It was from Daniel, the man who still lived in her past. He was back in town and he wanted to meet. The words sat between them like a stone. Marcus folded his hands around his mug and felt the heat steady him. Emma said she would not meet him, that she had moved on, but the message had cracked open a memory. Would a handshake from the past be enough to close the door for good? The question hung like a candle smoke. Pause and breathe for a moment. If you were sitting where Marcus sat, what would you do now? The kind of choice in this story asks you to pick between ease and courage. Tell us below how you would react. Start your comment with, "I would hold the hand," or "I would close the door so others can join the conversation easily." Your words matter because they reflect how we face small emergencies together. In this place, we share stories that nudge us to be braver and kinder. If you have a similar memory of a messy courage, tell it here. Your comment might help someone who is choosing tonight. But now keep watching because what happens next will test both of them in a way neither expected. The revelation came as a quiet undoing. A photograph that Emma had tucked into her coat fell onto the floor when she reached for her scarf. Marcus picked it up. It was an old Polaroid of a little girl on a dock, sunlight like a halo around her head, and a small pressed leaf stuck to the back with transparent tape. The leaf matched Lily's drawing. The image carried history, a summer, an old river house, a man with a crooked smile. Marcus noticed a faint ink note on the white margin that read, "Tenderly, Aunt Rosa," and the initials AU.
J, the name landed with weight. Emma had a past that involved the river in ways she had not yet said aloud. The photo was a key and a reminder and a small, impossible map. Marcus realized that this blind date was not blind at all. It had been arranged by people who understood her story enough to hope for a new page. Their next hours were full of small putting together. They walked along the river after the rain, shoes leaving wet prints on the boardwalk. The light was gold, and the city smelled of wet concrete and apple pastries from a late bakery. Marcus learned where Emma kept the odd collection of pressed leaves in her apartment and how she labeled them with dates of days that felt like little recoveries. He learned that she had studied art therapy at a community college, that Lily was not her daughter but a neighbor she adored and watched when Aunt Rosa worked nights, that the drawing Lily had offered earlier was her usual gift for new friends. The scene was intimate and ordinary. There were 8 clear turns in conversation as they traded stories about small losses and accidental mercies. "Why do you collect leaves?" Marcus asked. Because they remember the summer even after the tree forgets, Emma said. Because even fallen things carry color. She smelled of soap and river and the inside of a box of crayons. Marcus described his mornings, the exact way he made toast, the sound of his sister closing the bookstore door. They touched briefly to steady a book as they browsed at Sarah's shop. They shared a pot of chamomile and ate the last slice of a lemon tart that tasted like a memory. The sensory list stacked itself. The plush cushion of the cafe booth, the coarse braid of rope on the dock, the glimmer of river reflections, the roughness of a pressed leaf between fingers, the metallic melody of a bicycle bell rolling past. Each image repeated like a motif. Days turned into a gentle montage. Mornings became recipes exchanged. Evenings were walks with Lily, who learned to sing off-key and to point at the moon when it rose. Marcus fixed a broken railing outside Emma's building, and Henry, the landlord, offered a free paint can in exchange for the story. Veronica from the library recommended a book about river towns and lent them a wide edition with maps. Mark wrote a short piece for the local paper about a brave woman and a rescued child, and placed their story under the town column for human interest. They sent text messages that began with stars and ended with inside jokes. They learned each other's schedules, small rituals, the way each folded a napkin. The sequence showed them learning to fit edges together without forcing them. The moments of domestic care multiplied. Tea left warm on a windowsill, a wet towel draped over a chair, a child with sticky fingers imprinting new drawings on plates. The community around them, including Sarah, Mia, Tom, Veronica, and Mark, became a soft scaffolding. Their presence was never intrusive, but always available like lamplight. Then the past arrived in shape and voice. Daniel came back to town with a job offer that would take him to cities and to a life Emma had once dreamed of. He appeared in a bar where the lights were low and the music was full of other people's secrets. He asked to talk, and the conversation was a careful excavation. He spoke of mistakes and of growth, of a life that had been simpler to navigate with privilege and choices. Marcus heard reports from friends and felt something like alarm. The community was split into sympathies. Some said everyone deserves a second chance. Others said second chances should not be rushed. Daniel's return triggered a long memory for Emma of what she had once believed she needed to be to survive. It became a moment where old equations tried to rewrite new feelings. There were two separate moments of tension in the air, each phrased with a different kind of pain and gravity. The first moment was when Daniel asked Emma to come with him away to a new job, and she considered the stability he offered against the small, unruly life she was building. The second moment was when a council of parents questioned whether Lily should be left with someone who had temporary custody and what community responsibility truly meant. Each of these moments tightened the chest and demanded a decision. At the center of the crisis, Marcus and Emma each had to face a backstory that would not fit neatly into a single scene. Marcus had a history of cautious correctness that had been wounded by the collapse of a career in law after a case that cost him his reputation and his savings. He had been accused of cutting corners when in truth he had been protecting a client whose truth the court could not hold. He had watched colleagues move on while he stayed to repair what could be repaired. He spent 3 years paying small debts and even smaller kindnesses. He learned to make new friends slowly and to keep his promises to simpler things like plants and a poem he read each Sunday. He still kept the rowboat photograph in his wallet, and he still wrote notes to himself in margins of bills reminding him to breathe. Marcus had a sister, Sarah, who anchored him. She ran the bookstore and sent him postcards with quotes about weather and human beings. He did not tell Emma the full measure of his fear about commitment at once. He showed it in the way he hesitated before making plans for a trip that would take him out of town for a legal seminar. He weighed risk as if it were a tool that needed careful handling. Emma carried her own long, layered history in 3 short pockets of memory and ache.
She was once engaged to Daniel in a life that seemed tidy on paper, but collapsed because he prioritized the idea of success over the small, daily kindnesses that make a life livable. She had grown up in a house by this same river where her mother taught her how to press leaves and keep secrets under jars. She had lost her mother to illness and learned early that grief can teach you a craft and how to care for another person. She moved to town to teach art as a way of stitching together meaning from brokenness. She had custody sometimes and then not at all, and she learned to love the fickle hands of time by gifting her attention where she could. Emma defended the children in the neighborhood and found purpose in the shelter of a community center. She was proud and stubborn and afraid that love could be a contract rather than a companion. She feared losing the small autonomy she had earned by choosing the life that fit her rather than the life that looked good on paper. A moment of tension arrived that made both of them small and large at once. It happened on a wet Saturday when city officials floated a temporary policy about childcare funding and Lily's situation was mentioned in a public meeting. The room smelled of old coffee and paper, and panicked parents spoke in quick bursts. Their voices were voices of survival and accusation. Emma listened as if the floor might open beneath her feet. Marcus sat with his jaw set, listening to the word vulnerable applied to someone he loved. The exchange lasted like a held note in a music that wanted to resolve but did not. There were 2 paragraphs of memory and decision. The community offered counsel and burden in equal measures. Emma felt the old hunger to run toward certainty, while Marcus felt the new hunger to stay for uncertain care. They stood facing a choice with people watching. The climax came quietly and then with noise. Marcus received an offer to interview for a position at a firm across state lines, an opportunity that promised stability and the old life he had thought he wanted. At the same time, Daniel left an envelope on Emma's doorstep with plane tickets and a note saying he still believed in them. Emma had to decide what to pack and what to leave. For Marcus, the choice was between a return to a life of tidy prestige and a messy life that might include a child, art classes, and Sunday pancakes. They wrote and rewrote lists and arguments. Friends weighed in with advice and with recipes for resilience. There was a public moment at Sarah's bookstore when an article appeared mentioning Emma's name and Lily's incident with the river. Voices from outside the neighborhood started to form opinions. That evening, in a moment that felt like all the previous ones combined, Emma sat across from Marcus at the old wooden table, fingers tracing a pressed leaf that Lily had given them. What if we make a life that does not look perfect to the rest of the world, but is perfect in small, real ways? She asked quietly. Marcus looked at her and thought of the photograph in his wallet and the rowboat and felt his old fear and new hope clashing. I do not know if I have right now what you need, he answered honestly, but I know I would like to try to build what we both want without pretending it is easy. Their conversation wound through doubt and desire, 8 careful turns that mapped the contours of each heart. They chose to step back rather than run. Marcus declined the immediate offer that would pull him away. Emma did not accept Daniel's ticket. Instead, they agreed on smaller things at first. A shared calendar, a promise to attend one community center meeting each month, a commitment to be present for Lily without claiming parenthood. The choice was not dramatic. It was made of tiny, steady motions and a public sojourn where both of them explained their intentions to neighbors, to Sarah, and to Aunt Rosa. They mailed a packet to the family court with volunteers from the community ready to vouch for Emma's involvement in Lily's life. The town helped in the quiet way towns do, by showing up with casseroles and childcare and signatures on forms. Then they allowed themselves a separation that was more like a test. Marcus moved into a small office space by day and rented out a room for short stays during the week to feel what distance would do. Emma continued her classes and worked overtime at the community center while she waited on paperwork and decisions. The time apart let them find language for the fear and the courage they needed to build together. They exchanged letters as well as texts, handwritten notes that smelled of pencil and lemon and river air. 1 month later, things had settled into fragile routines. Marcus made a habit of leaving a pot of soup on Emma's doorstep when he knew she had late classes. He went to Lily's school fair and read a ridiculous picture book in a voice that made the children howl with laughter. He painted a small wooden boat for Sarah's display in the bookstore and left it as a gift. For Emma, the community center had found a small grant, and she used the funding to start a weekly art hour for children that included leaf pressing and letter writing. They both stood in a small crowd as Aunt Rosa handed Lily a ribbon that she had won in a drawing contest. The leaf that had passed between them earlier was now pressed into the pages of a notebook Marcus had given Emma. The notebook smelled like paper and promises. The town seemed less like a collection of strangers and more like a chorus willing to sing with them. 3 months later, the paperwork was still slow, but progress had been made. Emma had been given a volunteer role that allowed her more consistent access to Lily. Marcus had started a small legal consulting service focused on helping neighbors with housing issues. He found satisfaction in using those old skills for new good. The couple hosted a neighborhood potluck where Sarah read a short essay about how small acts have ripple effects. Veronica organized a reading in the library for the children of the community center, and Marcus read a surprisingly tender piece about fear and possibility. The press that had once sought a neat story about loss and rescue now ran a longer piece about community solutions, and the headline spoke quietly of second chances. The pressed leaf became a symbol placed in the front of Sarah's shop to remind passersby that beauty is often found in unexpected places. 6 months later, they published something neither had expected. Marcus helped Emma organize a modest pamphlet of the children's drawings and stories, and sold it at the bookstore to fund a new after-school program. The pamphlet had a cover with Lily's leaf drawing and an afterword about why small acts of care matter. They used the proceeds to renovate a corner of the community center into an art nook with paints and old maps and a table big enough for everyone. They threw a small launch in the bookstore and invited all the neighbors. The night smelled of soup and bread, and the river beyond reflected the string lights like a seam of fireflies. Marcus and Emma stood together under a lamp and watched Lily run with her rabbit. The press came, but this time the piece was not about scandal or rescue. It was about people who had chosen small courage over easy solutions. The community applauded not only the pamphlet, but the work it represented. People named included Sarah, the bookseller who organized the launch, Mia, the barista who donated coffee for the event, Tom, the dog walker who built shelves, Mark, the editor who offered to write an introduction, Veronica, the librarian who archived the pamphlet, and Henry, the landlord who helped build the nook. Each had a part. In the end, the object that had moved through the story was a leaf, a child's drawing, and then a pressed token. It began as a crayon sketch offered in apology, and ended as the symbol on the pamphlet binding. It meant different things at different times. Bravery, memory, the simple record of a day when mud and panic and laughter met and changed the course of lives. The leaf was pressed into the first copy of the pamphlet and later framed in the community center as proof that small things can hold entire stories. They did not find perfect answers, only the patient work of choosing each other in imperfect circumstances. They learned that recovery comes, and that love often wears the clothes of ordinary days. The last image is of Marcus and Emma on the bookstore steps on a humid evening, sharing a slice of lemon tart, smiling as Lily runs ahead with a ribbon in her hair. The final line is simple and true. Love does not always arrive tidy. It often comes muddy and smiling and ready to stay. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe for more quiet, human moments.